So that said, thanks, Sarah. So recording is in progress, and Sarah Osborne from Social Finance is going to be our tech person and help us maybe go through some slides if we need to relook at some things and really sort of jump in. And I have to say, I'm really impressed and so grateful for your comments that you started to make in the earlier part of the morning, in already coming to the table with your experiences and your great ideas to think about the unifying framework and how to move some of our systems forward that we already have, but also reinvent and think anew in developing new things that would be great for the field. So that said, I'm just going to give you a second to situate yourself. You probably have the issue brief, I'm hoping. I believe that was sent, right, Sarah, on Friday. You might want to have that handy because that probably has a good amount of detail, and especially the pages that have the recommendations that are more than just the slides that we provided this morning on pages 12 through 16 actually goes into more depth around the recommendations that we just breezed through. So if you had that available and handy, that might be something to take a look at as we engage in this conversation. And really, this is all about you. I'm just going to sort of just facilitate a few thinking questions for you. And this is about you in your reaction and sharing your great ideas to help with some solutions. We really want to take information back to the work group and have us percolate more about the things that you say so that we can come back with some revisions and come back to you with lots of things that you'll need to percolate some more about. So that said, hopefully you've got the things that you need in front of you. And I'm just going to start off with the very general question. And I just encourage just the panel members to just raise your hand and let us know your thoughts. So here's the first question. Just in general, what are your general reactions to the recommendations? And is there anything that you feel that you need clarity about? Carmelita. Oh, you're on mute, Carmelita.
I should know to unmute now by now, but thank you. So this is a clarifying question.
Sure.
So if we are looking at following the unifying framework of ECE 1, 2, and 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just receiving the 120 hours, the associate's degree and bachelor's degree. There's a next step of licensure, correct?
In the unifying framework, it does outline a structure regarding licensure.
Yes, okay.
How that's structured, whether it's a step or whether it's in concert with, that is all left to be figured out.
Okay, so that is my question, because to me, it adds another level of anxiety to people to take a licensing assessment or test, because if we're trying to say, compare it to nursing, they have to take a TEAS 1, TEAS 2, and just taking the praxis, students already, freak out. So if they hear about a professional licensure, it just, to me, it adds another level, and it goes back to equity, because what happens if some of them don't pass this licensure? What if they don't get this license? Where do they go? Where do they fall now in the structure of the workforce system? So that's one thing I was trying to clarify in my head. You're adding another licensure, you have to have a degree to be an ECE 3, and then take a license assessment to get the license. So that was one thing that I was just worried about in terms of equity.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I would encourage everyone to dig deeper into the unifying framework, and I believe a link was sent out for that as well. And I also think that there's going to be time for the panel, maybe as a group, to dig into these recommendations outside of this type of format that potentially be raising up some of the exact questions that you're bringing forward. And we don't have all the answers in terms of implementation, but this is what this is for. What are your clarifying questions around the framework itself? What does it mean? What are some unintended consequences that could occur should we adopt certain pieces of the framework? So thank you. I think you've just started the deeper look into what the framework is actually saying. Thank you for that, Carmelita. Other first reactions or clarifying questions before we sort of move on with some other pieces? Representative McCarty?
Yes, thank you very much, Deb. No, I really think the recommendations are right on target. When I looked at it, it seems like a lot of thought went into it and really hitting all those points. We've talked about compensation. We've been discussing that for quite a while now. So I really appreciate getting the breakout and the 3 different tiers. I think that's going to go a long way. But if I may, I think it's important that, because we've done so much work in the last few sessions, I'd like to have our OLR go back in and see what areas that what we're talking about with the unifying framework that already would align well with some of the recommendations. So we continue to build on what we already have in place. And it brought to my mind the piece on the recruitment and retention. We just put in a bill that I believe was signed looking at housing opportunities for educators. And I think that is another piece to the benefits. If we can attract more individuals into the profession, knowing that here's where their compensation will be on these tiers, but also additionally, you'll have these expanded benefits. I think as we continue to try to build the profession, it's good that we keep thinking about those additional benefits that they might be able to apply for. But overall, I'm just very, I think this unifying framework has hit on all those major areas that we've been talking about. And I'm excited to go back to the report to see how they will fit in, because I know we delayed a little bit recently to try and to get this work completed so that we can go to the next step. So just in general, very pleased to see the work going on and interested in looking at those extra benefits.
Thank you, Representative. And I think that's a fantastic idea to look at a review from a legal perspective regarding what's in place and what something new would look like. And I think there's lots to do in implementation work that we'll need to sort of hammer out over the next months as well to bring up some clarifications. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Karen.
Yes, so 2 quick comments. I wholeheartedly agree that the compensation has to be at the central crux of all of this work. So one thing that I wasn't sure about, maybe I'm asking for some clarification. As the levels are established, the 120 hours, the 1, 2, and 3, will it be also built out that there will be a differentiated pay structure for each of those levels, so that within those levels, educators in the field can see an opportunity, one, not only for them to increase their education, but then the financial reward, so to speak, that would come from attaining additional credentials. So I guess that's my one question. And then the other one that I think maybe links to additional work for this panel is that making sure that there is then a consistent funding stream in the state of Connecticut for ECE that can really help fuel these increases in compensation for staff. So I guess maybe more of a question for how that will play out across the state, so that all programs would have an opportunity. And I guess maybe it's differentiating between state funded and non-state funded. How will all centers, all programs across the state be able to access that differentiated pay schedule, if that's the case, so that they can compensate their staff fairly across the state?
Thank you, Karen. And yes, and I believe another document, I know there's just so many documents to sort of keep track of and dig into, but it's all great reading, you know, for a nice afternoon on in a rocking chair somewhere. The compensation schedule, I believe, was also something that was sent, and we can always send these back out like in a packet pertaining to this particular meeting. Sarah, if you want to just make note of that, maybe we can send like a packet of all the pertinent things related to this work group. In the proposed compensation schedule that was set to the General Assembly in November of 2022, there are some differentials between levels. And so the compensation schedule is something to take a look at a read. And we also did work in that area to make sure that it is aligned with the unifying framework somewhat. Although it has other levels in here as well, but you will definitely see some congruency across the unifying levels with the compensation piece. So that is one area to look at. In terms of access to all programs, I think that's a great conversation to have, right? Where do we start with this? How far can we go as a state? And I think that the work group, the funding and costs work group, not to pass the buck, as I don't have a number in my head or how to calculate how much this is going to cost. But I think what you may see in the upcoming deep dives, think about how the questions you're going to ask there relate back to this work group, right? How are we then looking at the funding and costs of this and for whom? I hope that answers somewhat of your question, Karen. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions in general about reactions to the 3 recommendations? There's one on the compensation, there's the professional pathways and technical assistance, and then there's the recruitment and retention. Diana?
I had a question about in states where this has gone through. We heard earlier on the call about how complicated the current system is. What does that transition look like for the people that are currently providers to go from whatever they're called now to these 3 categories? How does that all work? It seems easier for the people that are coming in. That's simple to explain. But for the people that are currently in the system, how do you transition them? How does that all work? How long does it take, et cetera?
You know, if I had the exact answer for that question, I might be the most popular person in Connecticut today. I don't have, that's a great implementation question. And I think it's been on all of the members of our work group's minds. We keep bringing it up. What does that look like? How do we recognize the folks that are in the field now and the great work that they've contributed to in comparison to what we're saying as a framework? And how do we make sure we aren't excluding folks, right? We want everybody to remain in the workforce. How are we making sure that we're moving at the same time that we're recognizing everyone that's currently in the field? So that is the question of the day, I think, and the work group has a lot of work to do to sort of unwind that in the future. So I don't have an answer. However, does anyone else on this call have potential solution to that? We are interested in trying to make sure we hear solutions. We have lots of questions coming at us. So if you have great ideas, mapping all that out on what it could look like, please let us know. Okay, we can't solve it in the 15 minutes that we have, but if people like to doodle and if people like to kind of like map this out, please let us know what your thoughts and what your solutions would be in recognizing the current workforce at the same time moving to the unifying framework that has 3 designations. Thanks, Diana. I know I didn't answer your question. Awesome, great. Carmelita, and then we'll move on to some more digging in. Oh, you're on mute again, Carmelita.
It's not a solution, but I am just wondering, this is a wondering question. Diane, right now, teacher aides, the required qualification, well, the entry level is a CDA. And the CDA is the 100, usually is the 120 hours of preparation. The ECE2, which is an associate degree, and this is where the complications fall. In some programs, an associate degree, you are eligible to be a head teacher. But ECE3 in state funded centers, I can be wrong in here, but the recommended or the requirement is a bachelor's degree. So in terms of, because I was thinking about that too, how does this fall in terms of what's currently happening now, that there's a teacher aide, assistant teacher, and lead teacher, and even those titles are different. An assistant teacher in some programs is a teacher, and the lead teacher is a master. I mean, so it complicates things. So that's why I like the unifying. I like the titles of the unifying framework. I'm just worried about that licensing piece that I talked about earlier. And just to change the topic, I would like to just, I think my hat is wearing the higher ed as a faculty. And I just want the panel members to hear that, yes, it's easy to say in the recommendations to look at our credentials and certifications. But among the higher ed institutions, and I'm talking about 2-year and 4-year, someone needs to facilitate, something needs to be done, because we're not talking to each other. So I'm not sure if that could be part of our recommendation, that SDE, higher ed, and 2-year talk, because we have all these good recommendations of improving our structure of credentials and certifications, but the people who's going to be doing that, we're not talking. We're not agreeing on certain things. So I think we need to start there too, is to make sure that the 2-year and the 4-year are agreeing to accept courses, accept credits, or give credits for experience for a person, for a provider who's been working for 25 years, but only has CDA. What can we give to that person? You know, what can community colleges, what can 4-year do? So.
Thank you, Carmelita. Yeah, you know, and having worked in higher ed with you now for much of my career, actually, I think 2 things, and I'm just going to point people back to the issue brief that was sent on page 5, gives a definition of ECE1, ECE2, and ECE3 to take a look at those definitions. And folks that sort of live in the complexity of what our reality is today, you can like literally map out what you know today of what we live in and what those definitions are, and almost draw out where you think people fit into. And so what we need from you is, from the work group, we need your questions and an understanding of what you need as a panel to help us think through some of these things. So what are your critical questions that you would like us to address? I hear some implementation pieces, right? I hear some alignment pieces that perhaps the work group needs to go back and take a look at. We need to know from you, after this meeting, what are our next steps to come back with, to say you'd like to see something else fleshed out in the recommendations. Carmelita, I hear more coming from you around, okay, great, we need the higher education 2-year and 4-year community talking to one another, right? To me, this goes beyond, this isn't just about Office of Early Childhood. This is about other systems as well, and other committees. So what type of question would help the OEC bring that forward? And I look at, you know, Representative McCarty right here, a representative in your group, right? So what would it take at the legislative level, or the commission, the Committee on Higher Education, right? There's a role there in helping to bring the system together. So be thinking more also about the questions you need to throw back at us to help us help you in your thinking. Thanks, Carmelita. Representative McCarty, sorry to put you on the spot there.
No,
now
but
you got a job to do.
Well, and I'm glad you said that because it was going along with my thinking. I think part of our issue really honestly is the importance of the structure of the profession to the legislature and building up that culture that this is not babysitting, and this is what I hear from a number of my colleagues. They're not really have a complete understanding of what the profession is all about. So I think we have to start there because that relates always with the compensation piece and all the other pieces. So if we could just delve in a little more to the importance of the structure and building the reputation within the legislative framework, how we do that, whether we have the early child care caucus now, but maybe there's a way that we can bring in more communication informational sessions just to get that level of understanding to the next degree, because I think that will help us with all the other pieces that we have, because the question was there, how do we secure the funding piece? Well, if people understand that this is crucial work and it's tied to workforce development and all the other pieces we've talked about, I think that's an area that we still have work to do. So I just thank you for bringing up the legislative role in all of it. But I think I'm there to do whatever I can to be useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Appreciate that. That's a great suggestion to get at that root, that mental model that everybody needs to get to for some understanding. Thank you for that. Karen.
So Deb, I had a comment going back to the piece around alignment, right? So you and I and many others on this call were a part of the workforce task force that Speaker of the House, Matt Ritter, had pulled together to make recommendations about the workforce. And in that work group or on that task force, there was representatives from K-12, higher ed. It had cross the board representation. So my alignment question is, would those recommendations or have those recommendations from that task force made it to or been taken into consideration by the blue ribbon panel in terms of that alignment piece? Because some of these conversations were had in a different space, particularly around the alignment, or not the alignment, but around initiatives to strengthen and address some of the workforce issues.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. And yes, the executive summary, I believe, was the link that was sent as well. And Sarah, we can add that to our list to send everyone like a packet of the task force, just to bring everybody up to speed. There was a task force to analyze and make recommendations on issues relating to early childhood workforce development. And it was very quick. It was, over a few months that they met. Commissioner Bai and myself sat in on the majority of those conversations. And those recommendations were considered in our recommendations from the work group. I could read through a few of them that directly align. Probably best that you go back and read at least the executive summary. But in terms of compensation, looking at the existing compensation scale, in terms of aligning with the unifying framework, that is in the task force recommendations, as well as looking at the OEC and the State Department of Education credentialing and certification system and revamping that. Those were the three main ones that you might notice if you were part of that task force come through in the recommendations to the blue ribbon panel. But there are also some other things in that task force that perhaps we need to take a look at, and we would welcome your suggestions, Karen, since you were on the task force, to go back and look at those recommendations from the task force and come back to us with some questions or some suggestions on how better we could align or take a look at those recommendations to be incorporated.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Sure. Awesome. Well, this has been, we've got about 9 minutes left. And we've got some general reactions. do you see if there's anything missing? Do you think there's anything missing from the recommendations that we put forward today? And you might need some time to percolate on that, but off the top of your head, just really quickly, is there anything you think that's glaringly missing? Is there anything that you would sort of rank order, deprioritize, or float up to the top that should be more prevalent than others, other parts of the recommendations?
I think compensation is right where it needs to be.
Thank you. Representative McCarty?
No, and I agree, the compensation is central to all of the discussions and to elevate, but I do want to continue to emphasize that I think we still have work to do to elevate the profession. And we have this not only with early childcare, but we just went through the session with the para educators in the K through 12. And some work was being done there looking at with the high school pathways and coming out, being able to go in. So I think that's a job that takes a while, and we've made a lot of progress, but it's really elevating in its entirety the teaching profession. So I'd like to concentrate a little more on how do we change that notion and do some more work there so that the job will be easier if we don't have to do so much more work convincing and communicating. I think we get there faster if we have everyone aligned already with the framework. So that's all I do think there's work to be done there, because I myself am still learning. It's complicated. There's a lot to know. And if you're not on an education committee or dealing in this space at all, it's very difficult for legislators to understand what's going on and, with all the various streams. So I don't know how we do it, but I can say that I think it's still an area that we need to work on.
Thank you for that. And if others have ideas on how to do that, you're talking about that mindset, right? And that baseline understanding of what early care and education is all about, and what a profession is all about, and how we market and how we help people understand that. Because like you mentioned, the legislators are making big decisions. You're making big decisions. So, are we all on the same page? And what do you need to understand more about the
Well, and
issues
if
around
I
early
may,
childhood?
Deb, so this time we did get additional funding, right, put into early childhood, but we're going to need, it didn't really meet the needs that we have to. So in order to do the compensation piece that we all believe is central, we have to get to the point where early childcare education becomes a #1 priority, or education. And so that will help. And to do that, to get to that point, we have to make our case, and to make the case and build the profession, I think are two important areas that are going to require ongoing work. So thank you.
It will, definitely. Odette?
Hi, good morning. I just wanted to say that I agree wholeheartedly with what Karen had to say earlier about being specific levels, and that with each increase in coursework and experience, that there be specific compensation tied to it, so it's not so nebulous, so that staff are incentivized to take some coursework, move along in their career, and have there be something substantial to be kind of compensated with, and benefits is critical. And then also with Carmelita's comments, I think, yes, that licensure can be daunting for people. And her and I have talked about this before, that maybe it's baby steps. Maybe there's small ways that people can move along, because often the thought of being involved in a big piece like the associates is maybe too much at the beginning for someone to want to be able to move forward. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, I hear a theme coming up about licensure and trying to circle some things. I know Sarah's taking notes. And I also just got a flashing message that we're going to zoom back over in about 30 seconds. So Carmelina, I think you have the last statement before we go through.
Yeah, this is 30 seconds. I just wanted to follow up on Representative McCarthy. And I don't have a suggestion, but the only thing I could say is that it's a bigger conversation. It will include, of course, the legislators, we need your help, the Connecticut state system, the K-12 Board of Education. It's a lot of systems to be involved in trying to not really change our structure right now, but improve on it. But it starts with conversations.
Yes.
I mean, I saw the Early Childhood Task Force recommendations, but that only went out to a few people who saw it. So I think more conversations with the legislators and a bigger OEC, SDE, Connecticut state system, and I'll be willing to be part of it.
Yes.
I made it.
You made it. Look at that. 110 seconds left. So we can go ahead and zoom on back. And thank you so much for your participation. And please make sure you're sending us your recommendations. Thank you.